Stanford University.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about China, which is a particular passion that I have. I've just come back from China. I spent 10 days, actually came back this morning, this time around, and I go there very regularly. I actually worked and lived in Hong Kong for some years, running our global chemicals business before I took this role of running BP Solar. And in that business, I learned a great deal about the power of China. I had 5 manufacturing plants in China, another 5 in the rest of Asia, 3 in the United States and 2 in Europe. And I got to see how global competition plays out when significant advantages that certain markets have, or in technology or in resources, start to shift. The rise of China is a very powerful force that I think we all must carefully understand, and with it comes great opportunity, and I've been very fortunate to have had the chance to sample that in real time, and also in a sense coming up now as we develop our Chinese business. We've been in China for 7 years as a solar company, and we've sold products there for many, many more years, but China as a solar market is beginning to emerge as a very, very powerful force. So let me just start with a few thoughts to share with you. I want to have a conversation, so I'll present some things, but then we might stop and just have a dialogue with each other. Let's be very clear. China is very focused on the green, clean technology for the future. And we'll see some examples of where it has already become a leader, and it will become increasingly a leader in green technology. So absolute commitment from the very, very top of the Chinese government, and a lot of commitment from industry to pursue this path. So, I can run through a lot of statistics for you. I'm just going to sample a few. China's done some extraordinary things. Really, the economy's been transformed, but a lot of very interesting growth that's been achieved. Producing today half of the world's cement, a third of the world's aluminium and steel, and in that time frame where it has grown as an economy, it's doubled its energy consumption. So it's consuming huge amounts of coal, largest in the world, and the second largest consumer of crude oil. And of course, with the wealth has come a huge infusion of capital and foreign exchange surplus that is also powerful for investment and future investment. So, of course, China today, very formidable. This is the growth trajectory till 2004 in RMB. And you can see it's been an extraordinary ride. So I thought, well, we should really look forward a little bit and plot what happens in the next 20 years. And there's the chart. So it really quite extraordinary. In this time frame, we'll see a quadrupling by 2020 of GDP. Consumption of energy per unit of GDP will be reduced by 20%. And the Chinese government has already announced a 40 to 45% reduction in the 2020 time frame. So again, every time China sets a target, it surpasses it very quickly, and then it puts the bar even higher. So there's the challenge. Now, in that time frame, 10 gigawatts of solar installed. That is the commitment of the Chinese government. Right now, there are only a few hundred megawatts, and the whole market, the world market for solar, is about 6 gigawatts. So you can see the ambition is to become absolutely a world leader in solar. But of course, China is not the only country that is really pursuing rapid expansion in solar. Many others too. India in particular has a similar ambition for solar energy, and of course the United States and Europe continue to outline a very bold ambition for solar energy deployment. Of course, solar is very suited to China because it is a distributed form of energy. It is capable of going into all different ranges of irradiation zones, from the deserts of Western China to the northern cold climates. So very, very impactful for Chinese economy, and I think seen as also an opportunity to connect off-grid consumers to electricity, because there's still a lot of electrification that needs to go on. So today, the Chinese economy is really a coal-based economy. 70% of the energy needs, and of course oil as well. Lots and lots of challenges associated with that: pollution, greenhouse gas emissions, and a lot of environmental challenges. So, the government's focus is very, very clear. We need to address that, and that's done through a whole range of different policy instruments, from central government initiatives to local, provincial, and even city level range of different policy programs that are designed to take us down this path. The Golden Sun program is particularly interesting for us as solar, because it is the vision of 10 gigawatts that we saw earlier, and it's being rolled out right now, being lobbied for and being formulated in terms of tariffs, and it's really beginning to kick off this year, and we're, as BP, involved in a number of projects. Some of the world's largest projects, actually, will be built in China. These are installations as opposed to manufacturing sites, and I'll come back to that in a moment. So the size and the scale of the green economy in China, solar and all other green forms, could be very significant, 15% of the forecast GDP by 2013. And of course, China has some terrific advantages. Labor is still not just cheap, but also very intelligent. So one of the things I learned when I first went to China was actually the number of engineers and the number of scientists working in jobs that in any other country would be deployed with perhaps high school graduates. So one of our partners, when we went to visit their headquarters, explained to us that in the control room, which we went to see, there were, I think it was 20 PhDs sitting at the board controlling a plant. And when you put 20 PhDs in front of a screen optimizing a factory, you can see the difference. I experienced that myself in our own factory in China, where we used some of the brightest people to optimize and work day to day to improve the performance of our factory. So a really significant advantage. It's not just about low-cost labor, and I think a lot of people miss that point when they think about China. And of course, I think you all know 600,000 engineers every year coming out of Chinese universities. Very significant infrastructure advantage. So we just visited a factory, one of the world's largest monocrystalline pulling manufacturers, and they also wafer. They're about 100 megawatts today, just outside of Shanghai. Their new factory, which is going to be a little further out, about an hour and a half out of Shanghai. So they were sizing it for about 300 megawatts. So they're going to triple the size. And when they went to the local government and started discussing land and so on, the local government said, well, we'll give you an even bigger plot of land, and actually we'll give it to you for free. We'll also give you we'll build the site for you. We'll provide roads and infrastructure for you. Would that help you, do something different with this site? And the answer was, well, actually, with the same amount of money, they could build a 400 megawatt site. So they've decided to increase their production basis from 300 to 400 megawatts. When you have that kind of support from local and provincial governments to build infrastructure, it's very formidable and allows you to scale up. And with scale comes reduced costs and economies of scale. And that's where I think there's some very exciting opportunities for the future. Some people say, well, is this all just talk? And will actually the market materialize? Well, let's take a look at what happened in wind. So, in a very short period of time, and you can see it at the bottom here, really hardly any wind production in China. In 2009, 13 gigawatts installed. That's an extraordinary volume, bigger than the United States installed in wind in 2009. In fact, I think in 2008, the US did something like 5 gigawatts. So again, China really scaled up the wind industry very rapidly. And one of the biggest advantages that China has in wind is a very well-developed superhighway, if you like, of grid connections. So a lot of where the wind is in western China and northern China. The demand center is in the east. And the government invested heavily in very significant grid capacity, oversized for the existing electricity production from the west. And so therefore, when wind comes along and solar and other renewables, or even other energy sources, there's the infrastructure already in place. So very substantial. Now, of course, at the beginning of the journey on wind, there were really no local manufacturers. All of the equipment was imported from overseas, from companies like GE and Vestas and others. China took the challenge on of developing its own wind manufacturing base and very quickly built what would be world-scale wind manufacturing companies today. And those companies are now the ones that are installing and winning the business here to continue to grow wind capacity in China. So solar is a great opportunity. It's sort of the reverse of wind. China has started by being a manufacturer and exporting to the rest of the world. It is the world's largest producer of solar equipment, and most of it goes overseas. One of the interesting dynamics we will consider is whether we will have a situation where there may be a war on panels. So if you own all of the manufacturing capacity and you have very strong domestic demand, how do you trade off the world's needs versus your own needs? Now, a lot of these companies are private companies. They will go wherever the margin is, us included. And so there will be some interesting dynamics that will emerge, because right now everybody thinks of the market as long, and therefore anybody who wants a solar system can buy it and get it at a reasonable cost. Well, memories are short. Only 2 years ago, we were very short. In fact, right now, in the first quarter of 2010, we're sold out, the industry's sold out, and we're all scrambling around to find solar panels. So it's very interesting how immature the solar supply chain really is right now, and how much it has to go to get to the place where oil and gas and other energy products have got to in being abundantly available with a deep supply chain and a lot of flexibility. So again, a lot of stresses and strains will come. But of course the government has really helped its local domestic manufacturing industry with all of the support structures that I described earlier to help make sure that Chinese companies are providing the world's solar energy. So domestic market, we talked about the Golden Sun program. So here's where we're at. It's a very significant scheme. It will be supported by central and provincial governments with top-ups and various other incentives that will be delivered. The central government has obviously built the framework, and we're beginning to starting to see now some of the tariff proposals coming through. And in due course, I think probably in the next few months, all of it will be finalized, and then we'll start to see people actually committing panels to the ground and beginning to install systems. So very, very significant program. I actually spent some time in Jiangsu province this week, and it's extraordinary. I mean, I visited 2 sites. So let me give you a sense. Our biggest factory in the world is BP Solar. It's 180 megawatts. It's in Xi'an, which is Shaanxi province in China. We visited a factory that was 500 megawatts. It will be starting production in July. And we visited a second site for the same company, which is also 500 megawatts. And that's starting up also in June, July of this year. So the ability to move rapidly to scale, and how powerful that is, because the unit costs come down very substantially when you get to a gigawatt scale, is really quite stunning. So a lot of focus on this, and I think you'll see it come through in a very substantial growth. BP in China, a little bit about us. We're the largest foreign investor in China. We've invested $5 billion so far in gas, in fuels, petrochemicals, where I used to work, and lubricants. We have a lot of investment in R&D, and clean energy R&D centers. And in fact, I would say that's yet more exciting for the future of China, because R&D is a real focus. Some of the best and brightest who've learned their trade overseas, or some that are developing new innovations in China, are coming through now. And it's going to be wonderful for the industry to have that pool of resources available. I mentioned our factory, our joint venture with actually an electrical transformer company, one of the largest in the world. They're our partner in Xi'an, and we're the second largest company in the province as an exporter and manufacturer. So you'll see that actually, fundamentally here, we will see a huge influx of capital into the Chinese renewables sector. The green economy will emerge in China, and it will really deliver some very significant production of electricity, which will be get to the levels of 15% of the total energy mix in China in a period of 20 to 30 years. So some interesting questions. So with all of this scale and capability, what does this really mean for the United States and for the rest of the world? Will China be the world's largest solar market in due course? Today, the largest solar market is Germany. It's been Germany for some time. Germany has a very interesting, consistent set of policy frameworks. Was the first to introduce the feed-in tariff regime. And as I was explaining to a group of students earlier, it's very interesting because that stimulus of a direct subsidy that really bridges the gap between the cost of solar electricity and other forms is the fastest way to get growth to happen. And many, many economies around the world have deployed this system. Here in the United States, we have the investment tax credit. Obviously, you need tax capacity, and you need to wait some time before you get the benefit of deploying solar energy, and it's complicated. Well, you know that Germany started with a tax-based policy and saw that it did not kick off demand and decided to move to the feed-in tariff, and suddenly demand did rapidly come. So my view, and we've expressed it to Secretary Chu, I hope you express it to him when he comes next week. The United States, if it's really going to grow to be a material solar economy, requires a direct stimulus, such as a feed-in tariff system. And we believe that without that, it will be very difficult to see the US be much, much larger than China is, both in absolute sense, but also in its proportion of energy consumption from solar energy. So I'm going to stop there. I think it's, as I said earlier, I'd like to have a discussion with you. So I've just hopefully prompted some thoughts and ideas in your heads, and maybe now we can open it up for some discussion.
Questions? Here.
What do you see with the lack of panels down the immediate production line as affecting in the years to come? How do you see the ramp up to supply the tremendous demand that could happen?
Right. So the issue, the sort of statement I made earlier about the immaturity of the supply chain. So we have to remember that to make a panel, we start a long way away with some quartzite that is mined, which has to be essentially heated up and its purity improved substantially to get it to about 99.79% purity as pure polysilicon. That process requires, it's a chemical process, requires very significant investment and has significant lead times to ramp up a factory in order to produce quantities that can be used at the right purity and the right cost. The interesting noise in the background. That's really the starting point, because then we take the polysilicon which is produced, melt it again, basically make bricks out of it or large cylinders, and then we slice those into wafers, and then we take the wafers and we have to treat them, make them into an electrical instrument, and then we have to string them up, put some glass on both sides and a backsheet, and then put a panel on before we have a product that we can use that produces electricity. So the issues of the supply chain are really to do with that whole process from start to finish. So about 4 years ago, maybe 5 years ago, let's say, polysilicon was reasonably abundant, and it was fairly priced. So we had prices of about $30 to $40 a kilo for high quality polysilicon. 2 years ago, the price of polysilicon was $400 a kilo, and so a factor of 10 higher. Why? Because essentially the industry underestimated demand for solar, and so didn't build capacity sufficiently to be able to supply that demand. And so we had shortages, and the price went up. Now, today, the price is back down to between $50 and $60 a kilo. So again, can you imagine that kind of volatility and the impact that has on pricing of solar energy, but also availability of product and our ability to ramp up the supply chain in the business? So I would say we're still learning how to create a stable, economically efficient supply chain. And I think we'll still see stresses and strains and shortages in this market. As the lead times are compressed, that will help. So it used to take about 5 years to ramp up a polysilicon plant, which is extraordinary. Think about it. There's very few other industries that take that long to really get a factory to maximum capacity. Today, it would take 3 years, perhaps 2 years in the leading suppliers that we see. So yeah, that will help. But when you have, I think it was 87% growth in solar in 2008, stayed flat in 2009, maybe went up a little bit, and 2010 looks like it might take another big leap. That was a very useful thing for us because we could take a breath, to catch up before the next cycle comes. And I have to say, the cycle that I see in 2010 and 11 is very daunting. It's a very substantial growth that we see.
Do you see the Golden Sun program being something stable over time, or do you think it's going to be, is there some possibility that it could wind up like a bonanza like we saw in Spain a few years ago?
Great question. I think that Spain was really a unique situation. The German system has been the most effective. I mean, essentially we have about 8 to 10% degradation every year in the tariff. The industry knows about it, it expects it. What happened this year is quite interesting because the German government decided actually, because costs have come down so much faster than they expected, they decided to do a sort of mid-year correction and on top, just to make sure that they have the balance right between funding that gap and overfunding it. So I think that everyone's learned from that. The Italian government has learned from that in their development of their feed-in tariff scheme, and we're seeing them also reduce the tariffs progressively over time. And I think the Golden Suns program will be adjusted after a period of time, because I think you need to sort of keep it stable for a certain period, let's call it a couple of years, to see the demand take off. It's literally like lighting a fire. If you don't see it start, it means your incentive mechanism is not effective. And so I suspect it will have some corrections. But the key is that you create a stable sort of expectation around that so that the industry can plan appropriately and we don't have these stresses and strains.
The Chairman's prerogative here to ask a question. So I've heard the claim made that while the prices are likely to continue to come down on the cells themselves, there hasn't been similar progress in the balance of systems. So the inverters, all the steel, the stuff aluminum you hang it on, and all that kind of stuff. What's your view of that? Is that right or wrong, and what can we expect in that arena?
I think that's correct. So I think it's really to do with scale. So if you think about where solar has been deployed, it's been mostly in the residential market. So the balance of systems component is small or not as challenging in terms of scale. But increasingly now we're doing utility scale projects. And these, so I'll tell you our own experience. So we used to do, a big project for us was about 1 megawatt. A solar farm, about 1 megawatt would be a big challenge for us. So last year we did a 10 megawatt farm. This year we're doing in Long Island, actually on a DOE facility in Brookhaven, we're doing 37 megawatts. And I'll say this here privately to you, but it is not public. We've just won a contract for a 600 megawatt project here in the United States. Now, a 600 megawatt project, so let me put it this way. If you're buying a megawatt's worth of inverters, you'll get a good price. If you buy 600 megawatts of inverters, I think you'll get an even better price. So, that's some of that. It's really just scale related. Because, if you're an inverter supplier, you're going to say, well, solar's great, but it's still relatively small. I'm selling more inverters to other segments than I am here. But I think increasingly we'll see that. And secondly, frankly, there have been only a handful of suppliers in some of these components. And that's changing very rapidly too. It's becoming more of an industry. And then I would say, just generally how we plan projects and how we execute them is going to fundamentally change. So I think there's plenty of upside in the non-module cost structure. But I think there's also some pretty interesting upside in the module too.
The 10 gigawatts by 2020 just doesn't sound very much when they're building a gigawatt a week over there for new electricity capacity. Why is it so low? Is it you don't expect the LCOE to go down below competitive technologies, or is it capacity limited, or what?
So I'll give you this sort of little data point. Yeah, the question was about the scale, the 10 gigawatts. Is it really that significant, and why isn't it a lot more compared to other forms of energy that are being added at those sorts of factors in a year or a couple of years? So you start with the cost, of course, because, and it's the LCOE, as you said. Now, the cost structure is changing very dramatically. So I would say 15 to 20 cents a kilowatt hour was sort of typical of what we could achieve with subsidy included. So that was, that's going to be double, if not 3x, what you could get from a coal or a gas-fired power plant. So today, for our 600 megawatt project, the PPA is 7 cents a kilowatt hour. So this is a very substantial reduction. That's a halving at 600 megawatts. Now, how many 600 megawatt projects are we going to do as an industry? Right now, we haven't done any. The largest we've ever done is probably about 50 right now. So it's an issue of catch up to the right kind of unit scale per project, which drives down costs even further. And as soon as you get that, then I suspect we'll be able to exceed these sorts of levels. But it will require huge tracts of land. I mean, this is the other issue, is there are many other challenges for developing large solar facilities. And of course, we need to creep up the efficiencies so that we can get more out of any given piece of land. Because at 15% or so efficiency, or maybe 18 for monocrystalline, you're still consuming huge amounts of land to do it. Sorry.
I've heard that China possesses most of rare metals, somewhere between 90 and 97%. I was just wondering if you could comment on how they're leveraging that against kind of the global market, and what you think, how you think the rest of the industries in the world will adapt and react to China's play on their resource.
Yeah, I mean, I think the depth of resource on this planet is still misunderstood or not understood. Yes, China has some significant reserves of various minerals and metals, and coal, frankly, for that matter. But I see them as really focusing on making sure that they power up their own demand first before they start exporting incremental capacity to the world. And that makes sense to me, because that's, they have a greater need, frankly, than the rest of the world, just given the scale and size of their economies. I also think that in our business, the more we can really use standard materials or readily available materials, commodity materials, to do our work, the better. And I think you'll see actually China push very hard in this direction, because actually there are some stresses and strains in getting those minerals developed. And I think that probably the best solution for the world and for China is to move away from those precious metals. And I think that's a trend that is well established and will continue.
My understanding is that between 95 and 98% of Chinese PV production is currently being exported. And there was an interview I ran with the factory manager about this. His comment was that as long as the foreign price is higher than the Chinese price, we'll continue to export them. Do you think that this is going to be a problem in the long run, or will the Chinese government make up the subsidy gap so that Chinese subsidies are equal to European and American subsidies?
I think there are a number of factors. I would say that the non-Chinese subsidies structures that exist will go down. And we've seen, as I said, Germany correct 16% mid-year. So by the end of this year, it'll be more like 25% reduction, which is very substantial in a year. In a previous year when we had a 50% reduction in the panel price, mostly driven by the silicon reduction, as we talked about earlier. So I would say that's the first factor, is the gap will shrink. I think the subsidy in China is going to be very focused on large solar farm facilities. And so that drives different economies of scale. So if you remember, the reason the European subsidies are higher is because they're targeted towards residential and small commercial installation. And that's been the lion's share of the market so far. Really, the industry hadn't yet figured out how to do big farms. And I think as we do bigger farms, as I said earlier, you don't need as high a tariff to make them work. But we've got to also cross that barrier and be able to do those projects first and prove that it's possible.
Seems like you've mentioned photovoltaics, but are you involved at all with solar thermal? Do you have any thoughts on different options? Sure. Solar thermal.
So we have looked at solar thermal. We continue to look at it as a technology. We believe it's still more expensive, and therefore it still has some way to go before it gets to the kind of level where it can compete with other forms. There are also different risks associated with it. We own an equity stake in BrightSource, which we believe is a company that has a good capability and is one of the ones likely to succeed to be able to create a scalable solution that produces reasonable cost structures. The reality is that solar thermal is going to be a niche market in the very high radiation zones of the world, and frankly, it is more like a small gas plant or a small coal plant than it is a PV farm. So it's a very different set of dynamics. We don't have any proprietary technology in the solar thermal space, and so we didn't choose to enter it as a kind of startup. I think we'll work closely with others who will develop the technology, and we may find ourselves in it if the cost structures realign.
Do you see solar, what would you prefer, utility solar power or rooftop solar power?
Well, right now, today, the margin structures are much better in the rooftop sector. But frankly, we're very interested in the solar farm segment because it's an access point into a much lower cost structure. If we can drive down through scale, because think of it this way, last year we sold a couple of hundred megawatts. This year we'll sell maybe 4. 400 megawatts, and I just told you we want a 600 megawatt project. It takes 2.5 years to develop that. But now, with 600 megawatts of demand that I can go and source, my cost structure is very different on the 400 that I was going to sell. So the volume benefits of large scale facilities to really underwrite cost structure are very powerful, and we need to incentivize those structures, because I can tell you for a fact that a gigawatt factory that has a couple of hundred megawatts already contracted is going to be much more cost effective than 3 couple of hundred megawatt factories, and we need to see that scale continue to grow. So the answer to your question is I'm very committed to developing the large farm because I think the large farm will give us a different access point, and I think it will get us quicker to grid competitive electricity, which is what we will actually need to make this a real business rather than a subsidized, helped energy segment.
Could you go over the answer to your second question again in a little more detail? Neck out here.
Stick my neck out? Sure. So I think that the manufacturing segment in China has the capability to scale up beyond China's demand. So I think that's in theory possible. The question, I think, somewhat posed by the previous question is, are the incentive mechanisms going to be right to enable that to happen? I think it's actually folly for other economies that don't have the scale advantages of China to try and emulate that. We've made a decision, I've made a personal decision to exit manufacturing in higher cost locations. So I shut down my factory in Australia, I shut down 3 factories in Spain, and some facilities here in the US. So our judgment was this is not going to work because our factories are very small and they are not sustainable in terms of their cost structure. So I think that you go to the places where you can get the scale, you get the economies of scale, you get the efficiencies, and where the government is able to frankly support those industries, and they become the manufacturing centers, as they have become in other commodities.
I would like to hear your comments with respect to the announcement that Bloom Energy made a couple of weeks ago with respect to their fuel cell, and the idea that the cost of the fuel cells will go down to $3,000 in the next few years. That would make it competitive with solar from my point of view. I'd like to hear your comments.
Well, a general comment I'd make is we are in favor of all forms of energy. Actually, we're not saying we should do solar or we should do fuel cells or anything. The world needs more energy than it can produce today. And all forms of energy need to be stimulated so that they can be cost competitive. I don't know the details of Bloom's announcement. I've met with them and I have a lot of respect for them as an innovative company. And I think they are going to develop something that is cost distinctive. But the issue for all these nascent energy forms is scale. They will get to those cost points when they have the scale. But the whole issue is, will someone fund that scale up, or will they actually be able to reach that point quicker? I think some of the things that are happening, I'm opposed to, which is we're incentivizing niche applications instead of incentivizing a utilization at scale. And I think we need to be careful not to kill some of these innovations by keeping them inside a small company that can't be funded very well.
Let's see, how about a student back?
I have 2 questions.
Yeah.
First is regarding the R&D activity among those local Chinese manufacturers. Do they invest a lot in their in-house R&D activity, or do they mostly get their technology from transferring technology from domestic university or from foreign companies or foreign universities? And the second question is, how competitive are the PV panels manufactured by Chinese companies in terms of quality and efficiency?
Fabulous. Two fabulous questions. I could talk about them for quite some time, but let me give you the summary. In terms of R&D capability, I think absolutely the game started with importing foreign equipment. I mean, you go around any of the Chinese factories today, you'll see German machines, Swiss machines, the equipment set is imported. Now, in 6 months later, you come back to the same factory, and there's a Chinese equivalent machine. So I'll give you a simple example. Lamination machines that we use to laminate the module once we string it together. I went to a factory about a year ago that had 5 German laminators and 1 Chinese laminator. 6 months ago, they bought 20 Chinese laminators, and there was 1 German machine left. So I asked them, what happened? They said, well, the German machine's pretty reliable, and the Chinese machines, weren't so reliable in the beginning. But actually, the German machines started to have problems, and we had to go and get them to come here. The lead times to fix the machine took forever, and we bought the next generation of Chinese laminator, and they've got 10 of them, and they've never broken down. So, it's extraordinary how rapidly Chinese companies have taken technology, reinvented it, and I don't believe they stole it. I believe they reinvented it, and as a result, produced something which is better quality. So my experience is that all the partners that we've worked with, they start out, they struggle to begin with quality, but they are so committed to improvement. And you see this in actually most Asian manufacturing. We saw it in Korea, we saw it in Taiwan, now we're seeing it in China. Nobody wants to sell an inferior product. And they recognize that they have to be high quality in order to command a premium. In terms of profitability or cost structure of Chinese companies, so here's the thing. There are so many companies now manufacturing that you have a whole spectrum. And I would say the correction we had last year was very good, because it killed a whole bunch of people. I don't want to use that word in a negative sense, but it really did push those inefficient players into a difficult situation where they had to either correct or get out. And I think that's very, very important for the industry, because we can't afford to sustain high cost structures.
Do you have a sense of what the geographic distribution of solar generators is going to be, or what it's looking like right now inside mainland China? Or is it all in rural areas, or is it going to be in big cities, or business of that?
Yeah, because the Chinese government is really focused on the large utility scale segment, it tends to be where there's a lot of abundant and cheap land and high radiation. So that's where it's starting. It's in Western China primarily, and as I said, the grid lines are there to be able to bring it into the east where the demand is. But I think we're seeing also the emergence of some roof programs in those populated areas. I mean, probably as well as I do, the cost of real estate in the sort of urban centers is just, Shanghai is more expensive than Tokyo and London. So it would be impossible, frankly, to secure real estate to be able to build out significant solar in those urban centers. So it's going to be a rural game, but not necessarily for rural application. It's going to be driven down these superhighway grid lines into the urban centers.
Okay, we have time for maybe one more, because I'm informed that there are actually some refreshments outside.
Fantastic.
So, we'll be able to continue the conversation here. We'll do one last question over here.
I believe I'm right in saying that BP Solar sold out to cadmium telluride a few years ago. I was wondering if you could give some perspective on that with hindsight, and perhaps with reference to first solar advances.
Very good. Do you like the way that question was phrased? I would say that we're the first company to build a cadmium telluride manufacturing facility in Fairfield here in California. And we had a bad experience with it, frankly. The cost structure was too high. The reliability of the product was not good. And the ultimate outcome of it was, measured against our benchmark of the lowest cost of electricity over the life of the panel. This was an inferior product. And I probably get shot down by my team for saying that, but that's the reality of it. Now, about 6 months later, First Solar was formed. And what they did was they took the process of manufacturing CdTe panels, and they really focused on driving it in a consistent way to manufacture a consistent quality product. And they did a fabulous job. So the question is, it's still a relatively low efficiency solution. It has issues with cadmium and other precious metals that are very challenging products for the long run. We still haven't seen, 20 years of operating data. I can show you 20 years of operating data from silicon PV panels that we've taken off roofs, and I can tell you silicon does not degrade. Fundamentally, it's a fabulous material to work with. Glass and other precious metals that have been sprayed on glass, they're very challenging. And we found them to be very challenging in the deposition and in the consistency over time. And so we'll wait and see what happens to the fleet of First Solar panels over time. I suspect they'll be much better than the ones we did, but who knows exactly how they're going to degrade over time. So I would say thin film has moved a long way. It's not just First Solar. There are a number of other companies that are developing very good technology in CdTe. And I think that it will be an important component of the solar mix. I see it much more as a niche product. I don't see it as supplying most of the demand, primarily because it's too low efficiency to compete with the other forms of high efficient production. And I think that you may see us back in a thin film game at some point in the future.
All right, well, please join me in thanking
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.